I was halfway through chopping firewood behind my forest cabin when I saw the envelope nailed to my front door, bright pink paper, HOA letterhead. That alone made my blood pressure tick up. I live 25 miles outside the city, deep in the woods where I built my off-grid cabin with my own two hands. No paved roads, no sidewalks, no garbage pickup, definitely no HOA. So when I peeled the letter off and read it, I nearly laughed. Dear Mr. Bradley Tanner, it started. As a member of the Maple Grove Property Owners Association, you are hereby notified that you owe 3 years of unpaid dues totaling $6,750. $6,000. For what tree maintenance? And then I saw the signature at the bottom. Agatha Zimmerman, Board President, Maple Grove HOA. That name hit me like a sour memory. Agatha was the same middle-aged woman who'd once run the HOA in my old suburban neighborhood. Controlling, arrogant, and somehow always holding a clipboard. I moved out here to get as far away from people like her as humanly possible. I tossed the letter on the porch and muttered, "No way in hell." But 2 days later, a silver SUV pulled up my gravel driveway, tires crunching like thunder. Out stepped Agatha herself, in her usual pastel sweater and pearl necklace, phone already out like she was filming an episode of Suburban Justice. "Well, well," she said, scanning the cabin like she was inspecting a crime scene. "You've really let this place go, Bradley. Agatha, this isn't a neighborhood, it's private land. You're trespassing." She smiled like she'd rehearsed it. "Actually, Maple Grove has recently expanded our boundaries per our revised charter. Your parcel falls within our jurisdiction now." I stared at her. "That's not how jurisdiction works." "Oh, I think you'll find we've done everything by the book. You'll want to pay those back dues before we place a lien on the property." I didn't say a word. Just stepped inside, shut the door, and locked it. I could hear her muttering something about non-compliance as she stomped back to her SUV. I spent that night diving into property records and legal databases. I'm not a lawyer, but I know how to read. And what I found made me laugh out loud over a cold beer. Maple Grove HOA had filed a revised boundary map with the county, but it had been rejected. Twice. Turns out they tried to rezone an entire stretch of wilderness to rake in more dues. The county clerk had denied it because it violated land use restrictions and hadn't been approved by affected property owners, including me. The next morning, I printed everything. Rejection letters, county maps, zoning codes, and most importantly, the HOA's own charter, which clearly stated they had no jurisdiction beyond their original subdivision. I drafted a cease and desist letter and had it notarized at the post office in town. Certified mail. Return receipt. Just to be safe. 2 days later, Agatha showed up again. This time, she didn't even make it to the porch. I met her halfway. "You've got some nerve ignoring official notices," she snapped. I handed her the envelope. "You've got some nerve pretending to be official," she blinked. "What's this? Cease and desist. You're harassing me, and if you try to file a lien, I'll sue you personally for fraud." Her face twitched. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." She snatched the envelope and stomped back to her SUV like it had personally insulted her. I watched her drive off, tires spinning in the gravel. I figured that'd be the end of it. But I should have known better. People like Agatha don't back down. They double down. And sure enough, the real fun was just beginning. 3 weeks went by. I didn't hear a peep from Agatha or her clipboard army, and I figured maybe, just maybe, she'd slithered back to whatever pastel-painted lair she crawled out of. I spent those days clearing deadfall, fixing my water filtration system, and enjoying the silence that came from not being under some suburban microscope. Then my mailbox vanished, not vandalized, not knocked over. Gone, post and all, like it had been surgically removed. I stood there on the side of the gravel road, staring at the patch of disturbed soil where it used to be. The only thing left was a laminated notice pinned to the nearest tree with a roofing nail. Non-compliant structure removed per Section 18B of the Maple Grove Community Aesthetic Standards. That was when I realized Agatha wasn't done. She was escalating. I drove straight to the county sheriff's office with the notice in hand. Sheriff Langston was a stocky man with a buzz cut and the kind of patience only a small-town lawman could have. He read the notice, raised one eyebrow, and leaned back in his chair. Maple Grove, that's a subdivision 20 minutes south of your place. They got no authority on your land. They ripped out my mailbox, I said. That's federal property. Langston stood up without another word, walked into the back, and returned with a short, broad-shouldered man in a Navy windbreaker, U.S. Postal Inspector badge on his belt. "This here's Inspector Holloway," Langston said. "You just made his day." Holloway took one look at the laminated notice and nodded like he'd seen it 100 times. Tampering with a mailbox's a federal offense. If someone from that HOA removed it, we're looking at jail time. I'll need a statement, photos of the site, and any documentation you have linking them to this. I handed over the laminated notice. They even signed it. He took a photo of it with his phone. That's more than enough to open an investigation. By the time I drove back to the cabin, I had a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I played it on speaker as I set down a fresh post to install a new mailbox. "Mr. Tanner, this is Dennis Klein, attorney for the Maple Grove Property Owners Association. We are prepared to negotiate a payment plan for your outstanding dues. Please contact my office by Friday to avoid further action." That was new. Agatha had lawyered up. I didn't call back. Instead, I paid a visit to the county courthouse. It took 2 hours of digging through public records, but I finally found what I needed. 4 months ago, Maple Grove had tried to push a petition through the zoning board to expand their borders. They had submitted falsified meeting minutes and forged signatures from supposed resident approvals. One of those signatures, mine. I took a photo of the record and headed straight to the zoning office. The clerk there, a wiry man with nicotine-stained fingers, whistled when he saw the page. "That's a felony," he said. "Forgery, perjury, and false filing. Who oversees enforcement?" He pointed me to the district attorney's office on the next floor. Within 24 hours, I got a call from an investigator named Camille Reyes. She wanted to meet in person. I invited her to the cabin. She arrived in a black Jeep, crisp blazer, notepad already in hand, sharp, direct, and clearly not interested in small talk. "You're certain this is your genuine signature?" she asked, showing me the document. "Absolutely not," I said. "I was never contacted. Never attended any meeting. Never agreed to anything. And you have documentation showing your property is outside their legal boundaries." I gave her a copy of the county's certified parcel map and the rejection letters from the Planning Commission. She flipped through them silently. "This is more than enough to open a criminal case," she said. That night, a squad car rolled up to the Maple Grove HOA office, which, hilariously, was a converted garage behind Agatha's house. According to court records I'd later pull, investigators seized hard drives, meeting logs, and a binder labeled Annexation Strategy. Over the next 2 weeks, subpoenas flew like mosquitoes in summer. Turns out, Dennis Klein, the so-called HOA attorney, wasn't officially licensed to practice in this state. He'd been disbarred in Nevada for forging legal documents. He was acting as counsel under an expired license, giving the HOA legal advice that, in reality, was pure wishful thinking mixed with threats. Then came the interviews. Reyes went door to door in Maple Grove, talking to actual residents. One elderly couple admitted they'd been pressured into signing blank proxy forms. Another man said he was promised a discount on his dues if he didn't ask questions. But the real kicker came from a former board member named Patrick Hensley. He walked into the DA's office with a flash drive and a printed email chain between him and Agatha. The subject line: Enforcement Strategy for Peripheral Parcels. In the emails, Agatha outlined a plan to gradually absorb surrounding properties by filing fake signatures, removing non-compliant elements like mailboxes and fences, and threatening legal action just long enough to scare people into paying. She even bragged about testing it on the Tanner parcel. By the following Monday, Agatha Zimmerman was arrested for forgery, conspiracy to defraud, and federal mail tampering. The news exploded locally. Channel 8 did a segment called HOA Gone Rogue. They even got a drone shot of Agatha being led out of her house in handcuffs, still wearing one of those pastel sweaters. I watched the whole thing from my porch with a thermos of black coffee and a grin I didn't bother hiding. Then the letters started coming in. Some were from other rural homeowners who'd gotten similar notices. Others were from Maple Grove residents asking if I'd help them petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. One guy offered to buy me lunch in town just to shake my hand. I told them all the same thing. I'm not a lawyer, but I know how to read, and I don't back down, especially not when someone tries to steal what I built. The county later returned my original mailbox post, which had been dumped behind Agatha's garage. Bent, but salvageable. I planted it back in the ground just to prove a point. The forest went quiet again. Not the eerie kind, just the gentle silence of wind through the trees and birds singing in the distance. I spent the next few weeks cutting firewood, repairing a section of my solar rack, and finishing the stone chimney I'd been meaning to complete since last winter. Then one day, a deputy dropped off a letter. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from the state attorney general's office. They wanted my permission to use my case as an example for new legislation clamping down on fraudulent HOA expansions. I signed the form without hesitation. Turns out, sometimes the best way to fight a clipboard is with a hammer, a stack of documents, and the truth. 3 months passed. The leaves had turned brittle and gold, and the wind carried that brisk edge that meant snow wasn't far off. I'd started stacking firewood under the eaves when a county surveyor named Marla showed up in a state-issued pickup. She stepped out with a clipboard, not the HOA kind, but the kind that actually mattered. "Bradley Tanner?" she asked, eyeing the cabin. "That's me." She flipped through a few pages. "I'm here on request from the state compliance office. We're doing an audit of all property boundary disputes tied to fraudulent annexations over the past year. Your case kicked off a full review." I waved her over to the porch. "You'll want to see the northeast marker." That's where they tried to fudge the lines. She followed me without hesitation, pacing alongside the tree line as I showed her the steel survey pins I'd recovered after the whole mess. One of them had been deliberately pulled and planted about 40 feet off course, something I hadn't noticed before, but now, with her trained eye and GPS unit, it was obvious. "Someone tried to bury their tracks," she said, crouching to record the coordinates. "This isn't just annexation fraud. It's tampering with state survey markers. That's a felony." "Who would have had access to do that?" I asked. She stood and dusted off her hands. "Only someone with a boundary permit. Or someone pretending they had one." She made a call from her truck, speaking in clipped terms about falsified permits and GPS manipulation. When she drove off, it felt like something deeper had just been unearthed. The following week, 2 unmarked sedans rolled down my road. Out stepped a pair of investigators from the State Land Use Integrity Division 1 named Deshawn, tall and methodical. The other, a woman named Ivy who carried herself like she'd seen every kind of scam in the book. They had a printed schematic of Maple Grove's expansion plan, complete with fake notary stamps and a forged state seal. "Where'd you get this?" I asked as Ivy unfolded it across my workbench. "Recovered from a desktop tower in Zimmerman's residence," she said. Her hard drive was a gold mine. "There's correspondence with a private surveying firm, invoices paid in cash, and a shell company registered in Wyoming used to funnel funds." Deshawn added, "We believe the HOA embezzled over $200,000 in illegally collected dues from neighboring properties they had no claim over." "Yours was the test case." My stomach turned. "You're saying this was planned, like a blueprint for expansion," he nodded. "She was building a land portfolio under the guise of enforcement. Once the liens stuck, the plan was to flip the properties to a development firm. That cabin of yours would have been bulldozed for a fire road. Ivy tapped the map. She had 22 parcels on her list, all outside jurisdiction. Yours just happened to get loud first. They stayed for 2 hours, photographing everything, asking about dates, collecting my notarized cease and desist, and documenting the pulled survey pins. Before they left, Ivy handed me a card. You may be asked to testify. There's going to be a grand jury. The next day, I installed 2 more trail cameras along my eastern property line, just in case someone else decided to get bold. But things stayed quiet until I got subpoenaed. The courthouse was 2 hours south, and the day I arrived, it was packed. News vans lined the steps. Reporters hovered near the doors like vultures, and the second I stepped inside, security waved me through with a nod. They'd been expecting me. Inside, I found myself sitting across from a panel of jurors, a state prosecutor, and more than one stunned face as I laid out what had happened. The forged map, the phony notices, the mailbox, the pulled pin. Every detail backed by documents, timestamps, and photographs. When I mentioned the fake boundary line that would have put my cabin under HOA control, the prosecutor turned to the jury. That's not just mismanagement. That's organized fraud with intent to defraud property owners of their land. The trial wasn't just about Agatha. It turned out 3 other board members were in on it, including the treasurer and a former county clerk who'd been quietly paid off to delay rejection notices long enough for the HOA to try enforcing their scheme. The clerk pled guilty first, then the treasurer. Agatha held out, of course. She always did. But when the state showed financial records tracing the embezzled dues into her personal renovation project, complete with photos of her new wine cellar and an indoor koi pond, her defense crumbled. She was convicted on 9 counts: wire fraud, conspiracy, tampering with land records, falsifying government documents, and impersonating a public official. Her sentence was 7 years, no parole plus restitution. But that wasn't the part that changed everything. During the fallout, the state legislature pushed through a new bill, the Rural Property Rights Protection Act. It required any HOA boundary expansion to go through a public referendum with independent verification and mandatory oversight from a new state entity. They named it the Tanner provision. I didn't ask for that, but I won't lie, it felt good. The cabin stayed quiet after that. I got a new mailbox, officially registered, bolted to a post sunk 3 feet deep in concrete. I kept the laminated non-compliant structure notice, though, framed it, hung it right above my fireplace. I still get letters from folks, some thanking me, others asking how they can fight their own HOA nightmares. I tell them the same thing every time: start with records, get everything in writing, and never let a clipboard scare you into silence. Last week, I got a call from Ivy. They'd finished auditing the last of the affected parcels. 22 homeowners had their fraudulent liens removed. 3 of them were reimbursed after selling their land under duress, and 1 elderly veteran got his lake cabin back after a court ruled the HOA sale void. I asked Ivy what happened to the development company that was going to buy up the land. She laughed. Turns out it didn't exist. It was another shell company. Agatha never had a buyer. She was just bluffing her way into control. I didn't say anything to that. Just stared out the window at the pines swaying in the wind. There's something sacred about a place you built yourself. Something no committee minutes or fake boundary map can ever touch. The land remembers who respects it and who tries to carve it up like a pie. Agatha learned that the hard way. And me, I just went back to chopping wood. The first snow came early that year. It blanketed the treetops and weighed down the pines like soft armor. I just finished insulating the new shed out back when I got a knock at the door, an actual knock, not the sound of tires on gravel or one of those clipboard-wielding zealots. This one was deliberate, 3 even raps. When I opened it, a man in a long wool coat stood there, brushing powder off his shoulders. He wasn't local, I could tell by the polished shoes and the embossed leather folder tucked under his arm. "Bradley Tanner?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside. He introduced himself as Special Agent Nolan from the State Financial Crimes Bureau. His tone was clipped and formal, but his eyes scanned the room like someone used to walking into hostile territory. "I'm here on behalf of the Joint Task Force investigating the Maple Grove HOA. I've been reviewing digital correspondence recovered during the search of Zimmerman's residence. Your name appears in several documents we need to discuss." I gestured to the table near the stove. "You want coffee or just answers?" He declined the coffee. Unfolding the folder, he spread out a series of printed emails, ledgers, and what looked like internal memos. I leaned over them. The headers were all official-looking, but what caught my eye were the subject lines. Asset forecast, Tanner parcel, projected development ROI, and one tagged Phase 2 acquisition strategy. "What exactly am I looking at?" I asked. He tapped a highlighted paragraph. Zimmerman and 2 board members had drafted a multi-phase plan to seize control of select rural properties. Your parcel was first, but it was never meant to be the last. These documents show they plan to fabricate compliance violations, inflate legal fees, and use forged liens to force foreclosure. "And then what?" I asked. "They'd quietly transfer the deeds to a trust operated by a holding company they created in Delaware." My jaw tightened. "They were going to steal people's land and hide it behind a shell trust." "That was the plan," Nolan said, "and that's not even the worst of it." He slid another document across the table. It was a scanned contractor invoice with my address on it. "This was submitted as part of a reimbursement claim to the HOA's general fund," he said. "Zimmerman signed off on it personally. It's for a property inspection and tree clearing services that were never performed on land she had no jurisdiction over." I didn't even have to read the rest. My cabin was being used as a phantom expense to siphon money into their fake development pipeline. "So what happens now?" I asked. Nolan straightened. "We've opened a second criminal case. This one focuses on financial misappropriation and racketeering. The DA will be filing charges against Zimmerman and both remaining board members. Your testimony will be requested again, but this time in front of a full state panel." I asked him to leave copies of the documents. He did, then disappeared into the snow like a shadow. Once the door shut, I stood over the table, staring at the papers that spelled out just how far they were willing to go. Over the next 3 weeks, subpoenas hit Maple Grove like a storm. Agents descended on the homes of 2 former board members, one of whom tried to flee the state, but was caught at the airport with a suitcase full of burner phones and a passport under a different name. The other cracked the moment they were questioned, offering up full access to internal files in exchange for a reduced sentence. The files revealed something none of us had expected. The HOA had been funneling money not just into shell accounts, but also into campaign donations for a local zoning commissioner, one who'd quietly supported their boundary expansion efforts by delaying audits and refusing to flag clear violations. That commissioner was arrested a week later. A special hearing was convened at the state capitol. I sat in the chamber as the lead prosecutor laid out the full scope: forged documents, false liens, financial laundering, election violations, and most damning intentional falsification of land records with the goal of coercing sales under duress. When I was called to testify a second time, I didn't read from notes. I didn't need to. I told the panel how they tried to use fear, paperwork, and lies to steal what they couldn't earn. This time, no one interrupted me. No one doubted it. By the end of the month, the state issued an emergency order dissolving the Maple Grove HOA entirely. All assets frozen. All current and former board members barred from holding fiduciary roles in any community organization for life. But the final nail came from a judge who issued a ruling I'll never forget. He declared all post-boundary annexation actions null and void, including fines, liens, and sales. He ordered the return of 3 properties that had been taken through fraudulent means, and levied personal restitution fines against Agatha Zimmerman and her co-conspirators for every cent misappropriated. They would be paying that off for the rest of their lives. One of those properties belonged to a man named Curtis Halloway, a retired smoke jumper who'd lived on the ridge 2 miles north of me until he was forced out by a lien he couldn't afford to fight. The day he got his deed back, he drove out in a rusted pickup and knocked on my door. He didn't say much, just handed me a flask and said, "Thanks for swinging first." We sat by the fire for hours talking about cabins, wind patterns, and the best way to keep bears out of your compost. No mention of HOAs, no talk of lawsuits. Just 2 men who knew what it meant to protect something no one else understood. The state later offered me a role on the Landowner Rights Advisory Board, helping draft language for future protections. I accepted on one condition, that every regulation had to be written in plain English, no loopholes, no legal gymnastics. They agreed. Weeks passed. The snow deepened. My mailbox, now reinforced and mounted in concrete, stood untouched. People stopped by from time to time, journalists, law students, even a few disgruntled homeowners from other counties looking for advice. I gave them what I could, but always told them the same thing: I'm not here to fight every battle. Just the one that came to my door. One morning, I opened an envelope sent by the state attorney general's office. Inside was a plaque, wood-carved with brass lettering. In recognition of Bradley Tanner, whose resilience and integrity exposed a network of corruption and restored the sanctity of private property across the state. I didn't hang it. I placed it in the shed, next to the first laminated notice Agatha ever left me: "The land is quiet now." Not silent, just honest. The wind doesn't carry threats anymore, just the rustle of pine needles and the occasional creak of deer moving through the brush. There are no more subs creeping up the drive. No more pastel sweaters pretending to be law. Just trees, sky, and the cabin I built with my own hands. And that's enough.